Gribble. Welcome to the podcast. Really glad that you're here. Angela Brown is back with Niche, and we're all about data today. So I'm telling you, if you love data, if you love digging in to what the numbers are telling us so that it can drive your work as a school communicator, as a school marketer, this is going to be really helpful because not only is Angela going to share some of the data, but she's going to be sharing how that should be impacting your decisions. She's going to be talking about three of their most recent surveys. A parent survey, how are parents searching for schools? Really giving you that data to know how you should be showing up for those parents that are searching. And she's going to jump into social media, which is very important for this podcast and for me in my profession. What parents are using for social media and what social media channels are students using, because students are also influencing those decisions parents are making. And then we're going to wrap up with, really the three big takeaways that you should be taking action on now. In regards to this survey data. So I'm very excited. It's very interesting. I know that you are going to love it. You guys, if you love this podcast, will you please subscribe and leave me a review? You can leave me a review. The biggest spot is Apple Podcasts, is where most people listen. You can leave me a review there. You can also leave me a review over on my Facebook page. Social School for EDU is my Facebook page. You guys, those reviews, just like reviews help for your school out on sites like Niche or Great Schools or whatever, reviews for this podcast or for my business help me help more people. So I would love, as a gift coming up this giving season, if you want to gift me anything in regards to this free PD we'd use for this podcast and kind of gift to you, you could give me something back by leaving me a honest review. I'd really appreciate it. So now let's get to today's K-12 PR tip. All right, today's K-12 PR tip. Guys, take a look at your Facebook cover image when it comes to your mobile device. The new Pages experience that most pages have rolled out to now. Some of you are in the middle of, some of your pages are updated, some of them aren't. But the new layout has really changed where the profile image fits over top of your cover image. And what we're noticing is that some of the text that used to be visible on the bottom is no longer visible. And so you may want to take a look at your cover layout for Facebook and make some adjustments, possibly moving any hashtags or taglines or anything up to the top versus the bottom. And again, you have to be careful with your Facebook cover image because it shows up differently on mobile versus your desktop. There's some things that might be cut off on one or the other. And so you really want to pay close attention to that. We've got some great templates here in the Social School for EDU membership program to make that real easy, but we're also making some adjustments to those suggestions because of the new Pages experience layout. So my tip today is just take a look at it. Look at it both on, your profile as far as managing it, but look at it from a user standpoint. And if there's some key information that's being covered up, if there's some photos that are being, covered up a little bit in mobile, that's okay. You're never going to get it perfect, but you don't necessarily want to have words not visible. So I would really urge you guys to take a look at that. And now let's take a look at the data. I'm so excited to welcome Angela Brown to the podcast. Hello, Angela Brown. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
And Angela is gracing me twice in 1 week because I made a big failure. We recorded this podcast once. It's the first time in like over 100 episodes, Angela, that I did this. So it's actually, quite the miracle that it's taken this long. But I am so sorry, and I really appreciate you coming back.
It's all good.
Yeah. Well, Angela joined us back on episode 101, and today we're going to dive in to a lot of data that Niche has just collected in 3 different surveys that they've released over the last couple months. One's going to be actually released next week. So I'm so excited to dig in and learn. But Angela, before we start that, why don't you just share a little bit of your background and kind of your role there at Niche?
Sure. So I have spent it's hard to say this because it's a big number, but almost 20 years working in marketing in different capacities and different industries. But most of my time was spent in B2B marketing. And then I took a job as the director of marketing and communications at a PK through 12 independent school here in the DC area where I live in 2014. So I was there for 7 years before I joined Niche last summer, in the summer of 2021. And that is when I just went crazy for education. It feels like home for me. It's a really special industry. No 2 days are the same. No two schools or districts are the same. So that's just it. It brings me a lot of joy. And in my role at Niche, it's really about helping schools to be better and make their lives easier in marketing, communications, and admissions. And so I create research like what we're going to talk about today. We have a pretty active blog. We do webinars. We also have a podcast. So I spend a lot of time on this handy mic here, talking to wonderful people just like you about the great work that we get to do. So
Yeah, absolutely. And you can learn a little bit more about Niche. Niche is more, way more than just a ranking for your school. There's a
yes.
lot there. So you guys recently released the survey results for 3 different surveys. I know the parent survey is coming out next week. We're going to give everybody a teaser and then a spot where they can go and dig into the results for themselves. But what should listeners, my listeners are school communicators for public schools, private schools, charter schools. What should they take away from that parent survey?
There's a lot. And that's the exact audience for this survey. I'm really excited about it in particular. It's probably my favorite. But this is a big survey season for us on the K-12 side. With this one, I'll start with a little bit of context just so people know where the data is coming from. So this was the 3rd year for this particular survey. We started it in 2020 just to kind of see what was going on with parents as the pandemic was getting started. And we've continued to do this survey because even though it's really helpful to have some benchmarking data about other schools, in your specific category or on an industry-wide basis, it's most helpful to know what parents are looking for and what they actually respond to. And we try to help you with both. And that's what all of these surveys are for. But this one in particular really digs into the parent school search experience. And this year, we added several questions to try to get to the heart of the types of marketing and communications channels that really resonate with families and influence their decisions. We also asked about the role that their students are playing in the process because we're seeing that kids are getting more and more involved in that school choice process, even younger. And so this survey was completed by almost 2,000 parents who searched for schools for their children coming into the fall of 2022. So it's very relevant, very current. And I think the biggest takeaway is that we're seeing that schools and districts are recruiting families in ways that don't necessarily align with the way that parents and caregivers are actually going through that process of researching, comparing, and choosing schools. But there's an opportunity to change. It's still early in the school year. So, our state of enrollment and marketing survey, which we're also going to touch on a little bit, showed that a lot of schools and districts are still prioritizing some things that are really traditional, like direct mail pieces and brochures and print ads. And that is not how parents are discovering the schools that they're considering for their kids. It's also not really driving the ultimate decisions that they're making or influencing those decisions. And then on the digital marketing side, there are a lot of schools that are still focused on more passive families with things like advertising on social channels. And those are helpful, but they're not reaching the really high intent families. And so when you look at it on our blog, the survey data is going to be segmented. There's a preschool version and there will be a K-12 version. But in K-12, we found that 25% of parents are first discovering the schools that they considered on Google search. So that's a big flag that if you're not investing in SEO right now, that's something that you're definitely going to want to do. 24% discovered their schools through word of mouth. So that just speaks to the importance of, having those parent ambassadors and those influential people in your community who can speak to the school experience. And then 24% also discovered schools through school search and review sites like ours. So you hear a lot about how people use reviews for everything from buying cars to sweaters, coffee mugs, things large and small. And that translates down to the school search process as well. And these are all things that represent high intent. So these are families who are actively searching for schools to solve a specific problem. And that could be a relocation, it could be having a child that's at a specific transition point. It can be a lot of different things. But it's not that postcard in the mail. It's not a radio ad. It's not a billboard. Those are some things that can work in very specific circumstances. We're not saying that those are completely irrelevant, but schools and districts that that take advantage of opportunities to invest in what the data tells us parents actually care about, they're going to get that consideration a lot faster.
Okay. And I mean, let's face it, there are more and more parents looking for options, even if they're not moving. Like you said, they're at a transition point, they're at a frustration point.
Yes.
They just feel like they're not getting the right type of education where they're at. And so we've got to make sure that we're showing up. We also need to do some things to retain the students that we have. And
Absolutely.
so that's something as well. But let's just talk about this a little bit because SEO, search engine optimization, scares some of us, right? We're like, well, I don't know how to improve. And so do you have any a few little tips for our listeners in regards to just maybe dabbling in improving that Google search a little bit for their school?
Absolutely. So, as the first place to start is your website. One of the things that we also saw is that more than half of families said that school websites were the marketing channel that influenced their decisions the most, or one of the marketing channels that influence their decisions the most. So, that's really, if you think about the sort of hub and spoke model in marketing, that hub is your website, and then you have all of these spokes around it that draw traffic to it. So starting there, whether you're working with a vendor or you're kind of bootstrapping this on your own, it's really important to have an idea of what the people who are coming to your website are searching for. So what are those key terms and phrases that are bringing people to your website in the first place? And what are the key terms and phrases that you want to be associated with your website? So, starting with your website analytics, that can give you a sense for what search terms are already driving that traffic. From there, you can also start to do some keyword research. One of our favorite tools that we actually use at Niche is called SEMRush. And you can use that to find not just terms that people are using, but what's the volume around those terms. A lot of the times when people are really out in that kind of awareness and discovery phase, they're searching very broadly for things like public schools near me or private schools near me or best public school districts, in fill in the blank metro area. So they start out really broadly and generically. Those are typically terms that you can bank, you can bet on because that's how people are searching. So you want to make sure that you're ranking for terms like that. And then you can drill down a little bit if you have some specific programs that are unique to your school or your district. Maybe you have a great CTE program or you're really strong in STEM. And so weaving that language into your website copy, into your metadata can be really helpful for driving that traffic and making sure that you have that visibility. And then you have to think about some of the third-party sites that also contribute to your SEO. So your social channels can help with search engine optimization. Those search and review sites are actually very useful in that regard. If you search for some of those broad terms that I just mentioned, or even for specific schools, a lot of the time you'll see sites like Niche at the top of the first page in Google before you get to school websites, because we've invested so much in search optimization. And so that's another benefit to making sure that you're paying attention to your presence in those places, because that contributes to your search equity.
Awesome. You mentioned a tool, SEMRush. How do you spell
Yes.
that?
It's SEMRush.
And is that a
And
free tool?
there is a free version.
Okay.
Yes. So there's a free version and a paid version. Of course, the paid version is more robust, but it's a great place for you to get started if you're just trying to get a sense for, some of the search terms and phrases that you might want to weave into your website.
Okay. And then I know, you had talked about too, like alt text in your images. YouTube can
Yes.
help as well, right?
YouTube is great. It's a Google property. And so we've seen, our data also shows that YouTube is pretty useful to schools in terms of recruiting both new students and getting parent attention. When we looked at our top social channels, YouTube was in the top 3, both with students and parents. So if that's not something that you're investing in, or maybe you've done it in the past and your YouTube channel is a little neglected, I would rethink that, because it can help with your search equity as well.
Okay, that's great. And then obviously, like you said, investing in some of those sites that can rank your schools, but you also talked about word of mouth. And I think I was
Yes.
just at a conference in North Carolina where they had specifically talked about these parent ambassadors and how that can be so helpful. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So parent ambassadors are something that are pretty popular in the private school world. I haven't seen it quite as much with districts and charters, but it's something that we believe everyone should invest in. It was one of those areas that has been marked for increased investment on the sort of traditional marketing side, both with districts and with private schools when we did our state of enrollment and marketing survey. But when we look at our list of traditional channels, it should actually be a lot higher, because we've seen that word of mouth and parent influence is just absolutely huge. And so ambassador programs, they're these programs where you bring in a group of parents or caregivers, whether it's a grandparent or another guardian. And these are people who serve as an extension of your admissions, enrollment, marketing, communications teams. And so you equip them with messaging. They've got to be on brand. They have to know what are the talking points that we absolutely want to make sure that other families hear. Sometimes they can serve as a bridge to new families that are coming in, and so they're on the front lines for ensuring that those new families can feel comfortable. They know how to navigate everything from, your internal systems to who do I ask about what. They're literally serving as this bridge between your incoming families and the school and their peers, right? And so if a parent has a question that they might not feel comfortable asking an administrator, they're going to go to someone who they feel like they can relate to. They're going to grab coffee at Starbucks with another mom, and they're going to have those conversations. And so parent ambassadors can also be really useful for just getting your fingers on the pulse of what's going on from a parent sentiment standpoint. And with prospective families, they can do everything from providing support at admissions events. They can host events in their homes. That's something that I've seen a lot of schools do, where you'll have a parent just host an informal coffee or happy hour, depending on what works for you, where they're just sharing the message and their experiences about a school. And so it's a volunteer opportunity that's great for parents who are very happy. These are people that you can typically tap into for reviews and things like that because they're already invested and committed to supporting your institution. And a lot of the time you don't have to give them that much in return. You can give them some swag. Sometimes they just enjoy having the visibility, having the access to administration. And so there are lots of different roles that those ambassadors can play, but it's a way of formalizing what members of your community are doing already. So you're making sure that when somebody sees, a mom or dad wearing a hoodie with your school or district's logo or mascot on it at the grocery store and they ask about the school, that they're conveying messages that you want them to convey, and they're spreading that positive news and sharing those positive stories about your institution.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's not necessarily related to social media, although it can spill over to social media.
Oh yeah.
But since this is the Mastering Social Media for Schools podcast, what did your survey say about parents and the social media channels that they're using?
I love this question because this was one of the things that I was most interested in hearing because there are so many new channels popping up every day. It feels like there's a lot of noise out there. And, any good marketer feels like they want to do everything, they want to be everywhere. And so this really gives you an opportunity to take a deep breath and say, okay, maybe I don't need to be on 50 different channels because as it turns out, 50 different channels don't actually resonate with families. And so we asked about social media, of course, and we got some responses that I think will definitely help Andrea out here as a big Facebook and Instagram advocate. So across K-12, almost 40% of parents said that Facebook impacted their enrollment decisions the most. And so Facebook is still very much on top when it comes to parent engagement. So if that's something you've been wondering about, you've been worried about, just know that continuing to invest in Facebook is a good move. 20% said Instagram. So Instagram was right there in the top three. And then, as I mentioned earlier, YouTube came up at 9%. And that one again was really interesting because it's not a channel that I hear people talk about as much. I've seen a lot more questions about, should I be using LinkedIn? How should I be using that? TikTok is always kind of circling around. And really YouTube was the one that rounded out the top three. So that's just another plug for you to consider investing in that channel. We know that video is really big. And that's another sort of medium that I don't see schools investing in as much. So I would definitely advocate for that. The reason why TikTok has become so popular is because short form video is so popular. And you can do that, as you've said, Andrea, with your Instagram reels, and you can repurpose your YouTube content on Instagram and vice versa. So you don't necessarily have to create new work for yourself if you want to expand your presence. And then we saw the same thing with the kids, actually. So 60% of parents said that their children played a role in their school choice. And that actually jumps up to 76% with high schoolers. So kids in that high school age group are playing a huge role in the decision-making process. So that's definitely something to think about as you're planning your social strategy and having a dual strategy for how you're going to engage the adults, but also how you're going to engage the students. And you can do that with different types of content because a lot of the platforms are the same. So we saw that 25% said that Instagram was very influential for their children going through the school search and comparison process. 12% said Facebook, and that was a little surprising just because, we keep hearing that nobody under 75 uses Facebook anymore and, run away from Facebook. The kids aren't there, but they actually are. And there's data that we have with our high schoolers who are searching for colleges that bears that out. There's other data that I've seen that shows that young people are still using it. It's not getting the same visibility as the TikToks of the world, but or Be Real or some of these more emerging things. But there is still an audience there on Facebook with young people. And then again, we saw YouTube pop up at 11%. And so TikTok was close to YouTube. So that's, and I'm anticipating that that's probably going to continue to creep up with time as that becomes um, more of a widely used channel. And also as use increases for things like this, part of it could just be that their kids are on TikTok, but not necessarily using them for this purpose, so that's something to keep in mind. But it's definitely interesting to have that validation that even though there's a lot of stuff out there and you keep hearing about how many users, are downloading these apps and all of that, you really can maintain that focus with and where you currently are is probably enough.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a good sign for what I have been teaching. I teach a lot on Facebook and Instagram. I do have some trainings, obviously, on Instagram Reels. My membership group, actually, in December, we're going to have a skills session on TikTok. So if that's something on your radar and you're looking for more support, my year-round membership program can help provide that. But and YouTube, I think, is an interesting one because it's less, to me, it's less of a social channel and it's more of kind of that SEO play where you can get stuff out there. There's not as much worry about comments and things like that. But it is good to get content out there. And like you said, you can repurpose some of the content that you're using in other places. So this parent survey is coming out next week.
Mhm.
And so where we'll link to it in the show notes. But can you tell our listeners where they can find all three of these surveys on your website?
Sure. So if you go to the short link niche.bz/insights, that will take you to the Enrollment Insights blog. We have a research category there, and you can take a nice deep dive into all of our research on the K-12 side. And you can also look back at historical data if that's something that you're interested in. But all of this information is right there for you. And you can download the images. So if you need a slide that you want to drop into a presentation, if you're trying to make the case for something, they're all downloadable. So you can do that too.
That's perfect. And, if you want to support this with data from your own community, of course, that's always a great thing as well. But it is nice to be able to see kind of at a nationwide level what's being used. So in October, you released your PK through 12 state of enrollment and marketing survey.
Mhm.
So you were kind of focused on enrollment strategies and marketing strategies that schools are actually using. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So what's the big takeaways that our listeners should be aware of there?
Yeah, I think with that one, I really just what came through loud and clear is the need to be really thoughtful about outreach. And that was something I had an opportunity to kind of reflect on because we did the data analysis for that before I did the data analysis for the parent survey. And seeing the differences between what people are currently using and what they're planning to invest in and what parents actually care about was really interesting. And so having an opportunity to review, I had my hunches, there's some things that you see where it's like, oh man, people are going to spend that much on, on the billboards, right? But then you see it and you see that, among all of the channels that families are exposed to when they're going through this process, something that's at the top for marketers might be at the bottom for families. That's really telling. And so I think working in an industry where the options are overwhelming and you can have a lot of voices outside of your office with opinions about what you should be doing, it's important to be able to take that step back and know that not only are those voices not necessarily correct, but it's just really critical to arm yourself with the information that you can point to say, this is why I want to invest in this particular channel and maybe pull back on something else. I think there's also a tendency, I don't think this, I actually saw it because one of the questions we asked was, how regularly are you reviewing your budget? And most people might be doing it annually or twice a year. And it's really important to see your budget and your marketing and communications investment as a living and breathing thing. You can't just set it and forget it at the beginning of the year. And so just because you may have decided back in June that you want to allocate a certain amount of money to sending out about a bunch of postcards, if you're now seeing that that's not going to work, I hope that you're empowered to say, you know what, maybe we should be making that investment in SEO and getting some support there, or one of the other areas that we're now seeing is going to help us move the needle more from an enrollment standpoint. And that's a great segue into two of the big things that we saw. We asked a question about what enrollment priorities districts and charter schools on one side and private schools had on the other. And both recruitment and retention came to the very top. And I think there's this narrative out there that, private schools are booming while, other school types might be having a difficult time. Charter schools are doing really well. But what we're seeing is this big bump that happened during the pandemic with private schools might actually be slowing down a little bit. And so we're starting to see a little bit more movement. We didn't see as many schools hit their enrollment goals coming into this year as we did the year before. We saw attrition creep up pretty significantly, almost 10%. And so we're seeing that kind of movement happening again, where parents are making, to the point that you made earlier, different decisions. And so I think that also kind of underscores the importance of not just focusing on acquiring new families, but also retaining the ones that you have and really making an investment in that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's good. And it's important to take a look at that. I agree, you may have set aside a whole bunch of money for something, and hey, when you know better, you do better. And so maybe
Yes.
now's the time to readjust. And there are, if SEO and some of those things overwhelm you, there are companies that specialize in that, and it's not as expensive as you might think.
Yep.
So definitely want to take a look at that. So then in September, you released your PK through 12 marketing technology survey.
Mhm.
So tell me what that survey asked about. And then is there anything there that kind of surprised you?
Yeah, so that was kind of a pet project for me because I remembered making that transition from being in the corporate world to being in the school world. You're dealing with a completely different set of circumstances, different vendors, different needs. And in the 7 years that I spent in that role, I went through multiple website redesigns. We implemented a CRM system. We chose a lot of different tools to serve a lot of purposes. And we had a project management system that we wound up implementing for my office. And every single time I went through those processes, I had to start from scratch. And so I really felt that there was a need to, and I'm sure, anyone listening to this podcast, and Andrea, you've probably seen this as well, the Facebook groups that we all belong to, at least once a week, there's someone jumping on and saying, I need a new website. Who do you use? Or is anybody using a project management system? Or what are you using for your email newsletters? And so I saw an opportunity for us to answer those questions by getting a sense from people working in the industry about not just what they're using, but how do they feel about it? Do they feel like they have everything that they need to get their jobs done? And, how often are they looking at their website analytics, and are they outsourcing certain things, and just trying to get that finger on the pulse so that if you're going through the process of choosing a new vendor for fill in the blank need, you have a place to start. And so that was really the goal for this survey. And this was another one that we segmented. So there is a private school version and there's a district and charter school version. The district and charter one was a little smaller. So I would love for people who are listening to participate next year. We do it in the spring of 2023 so we can make it even better. But I think one of the big surprises and this came out in the State of Enrollment Marketing Survey as well, is just how infrequent data and budget analysis is happening in schools on an ongoing basis. And we're big believers in data and optimization at Niche. That was something that I found to be critically important in every marketing role that I've had. but it's not as common in the school world as it is in other sectors. And I know that's for a variety of reasons. Data can be scary and uncomfortable for people. It doesn't necessarily come naturally to a lot of us who are more creative. You may not necessarily work in an environment where people are asking for it, and so no one's asking you for it, and you're drowning in the day-to-day overwhelm of the job. It's hard to carve out that time, but it's so important for making sure that you're using your time and your budget wisely. And so one of the things that we asked about was website performance. And 68% of public schools and 80% of private schools said, yes, we regularly report and analyze our data for our website performance. But even though that sounds high, if you reverse it, that means that 32% of public schools and 20% of private schools are not regularly doing that analysis. And we talked earlier about how important websites are in, recruiting new families. So you have a pretty high percentage of schools that are not regularly analyzing the performance of what's probably their biggest family recruitment tool. And that's a real missed opportunity. So that's a really big area to look at to make sure, not just with your website, but anything that you're investing in, you want to make sure that you're not just writing the checks, and that you're confirming that those things are actually working for you and doing what you need them to do, so that you're not wasting money and you're not wasting time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people are going to want to jump over to that one to see some of those tools and some of those answers, and so that'll be good. So just in wrapping up, you shared kind of along the way some different tips, but with all of this new research available for my listeners, are there just 3 quick things that you recommend schools kind of take action on right away?
Yeah, I think one overarching takeaway is that if you have some downtime over the holidays, this year feels like a little bit more of a normal year. There's not quite as much firefighting that's been happening the last couple of years. And I hope I don't regret saying this, but if you find that you have some downtime, use this point in the year to take a fresh look at the marketing tools that you're using. So whatever it is that you said in the summer, this is what I'm going to do. This is my marketing plan for the year. Take a fresh look at that if you haven't already, and try to think not just about where you fall among other schools, but what you might be able to take off of your plate based on the information that we just talked about. Because I think a lot of the time we look at adding more and doing more without taking anything away, and data can also empower you to do less. And so my hope for people is that they can use this data to stop wasting time on tactics and channels that are not going to help them to meet their goals. Because if you just keep piling on, that's how we get burned out and overwhelmed. So I would start with that. Definitely start thinking about how you're going to build more of a culture of data analysis, if not at a broader level, at least for yourself and the work that you're doing, whether it's monthly, quarterly to start, but just try to think about what is the cadence that I'm going to use to look at my data, look at how the different things that I'm doing is performing, and give yourself room to change and make some different decisions. And then I think the other big piece is just to really, really lean into search optimization. When we look at some of the other things that people have identified for increasing their investment coming into this year, SEO should really be one of those things that's at the top. And you can do a lot of that without, paying for it. There's a lot of work that you can do for organic search before you get into paid search. The things that we talked about, infusing those keywords into your website, the alt text in your images helps with both search visibility, because it helps the search engines to crawl your website and interpret what they're seeing on the website, but it's also great for accessibility. All of those things can be done for free. They don't cost a thing. It just takes a little bit of legwork. And then you can start looking into paid search. One of the things that we talked about too is looking at your presence on some of these search and review sites. And, I've talked to Andrea in the past about how claiming your profile on Niche is free. It doesn't cost anything to do that. And it at least gives you some ownership over what people see when they get to your school or your district's profile on the platform. So you don't get a lot of the fancier bells and whistles, but at least you get the ability to control the copy that's there, and you'll get a monthly report to go back to our data analysis conversation that will tell you how that profile is performing, how many people are looking at it, and that'll give you a sense of what type of additional investment you might want to make in that in the future.
Okay, that's perfect. So we got fresh look at your marketing mix, kind of the SEO. And then I know because we did this already, your third piece was kind of investing in that word of mouth, which may be in some cases the niche site, but then in others of just those volunteers, those key messages to those parent volunteers, really getting those folks involved, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that doesn't have to cost a thing either.
Right. Just a little bit of time. So that's perfect. So thank you so much. We covered so much, packed a lot in. Again, head over to niche.bz/insights. You'll
Mhm.
be able to look through there. They've got some great other information, some podcast episodes and those things, but you'll see these different surveys as you scroll down the page. Angela, if somebody has a question or wants to stay connected with you, what's the best way to do that?
So LinkedIn is my favorite social channel. So you can find me there at linkedin.com/Angela M. Brown. There are millions of Angela Brown. So I want to make sure that you know exactly where to go. And at Angela M. Brown is also my Twitter handle. So you can find me there. And if you want to send me an email, angela.brown@niche.com, I'm happy to hear from any and everybody and answer whatever questions you might have.
That's awesome. And we'll include that all in the show notes for you. If you have a big takeaway, a big aha moment, I'd love to hear it. You can also email me, Andrea at socialschoolforedu.com, or you can tweet me over on Twitter, Andrea Gribble. Would love just to hear it because this is great stuff. It's great information. But the big thing that both Angela and I want is let's take some action out of this. Let's use this data to make our schools better, to get in touch with parents, to grow our schools, to help more students,
Yes.
and celebrate the great things that are happening in our schools. So, Angela, thank you so much for joining us. You guys, we will see you next week with another great episode. And until then, we hope you keep telling those awesome stories. Bye bye.